What's going on, everybody? Today we're looking at a video from Jake the Lawyer. It is income tax and how we got there. Tax the rich, turn into taxes for everyone. Okay, so yeah, my name's Caleb. This is the Warrior Fist podcast. Let's go.
Okay, here's the deal. The reason why America has an income tax is because we took a baseball bat to a problem that we probably should have fixed with a razor blade, and as a result, everybody got fleeced. I'm Jake the Lawyer, and welcome back to Internet Esquire. Most people don't know this, but we didn't actually have real modern income taxes like we have today until the passage of the 16th Amendment in 1913. The 16th Amendment allowed Congress the ability to place taxes on incomes from whatever source derived at any tax rate that they wanted whenever they wanted to.
I'm just gonna pause it right here. I'm gonna be doing this a lot. Yeah, so pretty much the income tax, from my own knowledge, and I guess he's going to tell us this, is that it originally started as a funding for World War One, and then once we gave the government that sort of control, they would rather see that sort of power burned and destroyed before, before they give it back to us, basically.
But that's not even the most surprising thing. The most surprising thing is that the 16th Amendment was sold to America as a class tax on the rich, something that would only apply to the richest 2% of Americans. And politicians of the time sold it as a way of getting the rich to pay their fair share.
You're going to pay your fair share of taxes.
Not paying a fair share.
Pay their fair share.
Sound familiar? Within a single generation, this class tax on the rich became a mass tax paid by every single American worker. And it set the foundation for the expansion of the federal government into every aspect of our daily lives. So today, I want to tell the story of how this happened, how America fooled itself into income tax. It's a cautionary tale, one that we shouldn't fail to understand, with just as much implication on modern issues as it did on tax over 100 years ago. In the late 1880s, America was changing. A lot. From 1870 to about 1910, America underwent the largest industrial and economic boom the world has ever seen, a period that historians now call the Gilded Age. During the Civil War, the federal government took on massive amounts of debt in order to increase the industrial capacity of the North and ultimately beat the South. This spending, combined with new Industrial Revolution technologies, created an industrial capacity in 1865 when the war ended that needed a place to go. And with a reunified economy after the war and massive amounts of land to the west, the federal government seeded the underpinnings of an economic future. They did this not directly with money, but by reducing the economic barriers to what was possible for industry. Congress granted over 130 million acres of land to railroad companies. It gave low-interest federal loans to facilitate the construction of infrastructure that would not have been possible without federal government backing. And it placed huge tariffs on steel, textiles, and iron, which forced out foreign competition and protected domestic profits.
That kind of reminds me of what I guess the current President Trump, is doing right now. Like he was doing a bunch of tariffs, on a bunch of other places, and the biggest one was for Canada. Ironically, not even China, but it was Canada. And he did he tariffed their steel because they tariffed, I think, our oil or whatever, something along those lines. Like, they tariffed us, so we decided to tariff them back. And I mean, it's just quite interesting that this has always been around. I mean, it makes sense though. So because like tariffs, you're taxing everybody else. You're not taxing us.
As a result, the economy exploded. National corporations boomed, interstate commerce, industrial manufacturing, and westward expansion all soared. Cities were revolutionized with steel, electricity, telegraphs, and automobiles. And the demand for cheap labor to build this new America was met by hordes of European immigrants ready to do the work. As a result, an unprecedented amount of wealth was created in a period of just about 30 years. In addition, this explosion in population, economics, and possibility was an unprecedented low point in...
So about the same time as World War II is by the time that, we said 30 years. So if this was in 1913, that would be 1943. I wonder if there's a correlation there. Huh. just going to leave that open for debate in the comments.
Federal spending. The period from 1876 to 1896, the height of the Gilded Age, was also the lowest point in terms of federal spending as a percentage of GDP in the history of the United States. Limiting federal government revenue to only tariffs, excise taxes, and duties, while allowing the government to seed new economic industries rather than directly finance them, created such a robust economy that somehow, perhaps as if by miracle, the federal government didn't actually need any additional revenue to operate. High tariffs, to the tune of 50% on some goods, generated such enormous amounts of revenue for the federal government that they were actually running surpluses, meaning that things were going so well, even the federal government was making money. But the Gilded Age had a dark side.
Great.
Huge swaths of the American
hold on.
economy.
That is how it raises the price of like goods and services, and we are forced to pay. Okay, so maybe them back in the early 1900s, they didn't have to pay for all that because it sounds a lot better. Okay, I'm just gonna be honest. Anyway, back to what we were talking.
Economy were controlled by an incredibly small group of men. Industry barons like John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, and Cornelius Vanderbilt.
Guys, yeah, like these are the guys who, if you want to look inside your history books and all that sorts of stuff, yeah, Carnegie, let me see.
Were controlled by an incredibly small group of men. Industry barons like John D. Rockefeller,
Yep.
J.P. Morgan,
Yep.
Andrew Carnegie, and Cornelius
Yep.
Vanderbilt.
Oh, yeah. That all of that is true. All of that is true. Like there was like maybe in like side tangent, but like it's a part of the bigger tangent. The reason why we have the banking system that we do is because it was voted upon. It like pretty much like there was 5 guys, right? They were practically selling themselves raw, selling us as a form of collateral. By us, I mean the American. Anyway, but pretty much like 3 out of the 5 guys left. They completely disagreed because they got a moral conscience. And they were just like come with us onto this boat. And one guy was just like, I don't know. And so he did. But 2 out of the 5 guys, they went. And the bank, and so like it separated, it sank. So all that was left was for the 2 other guys to almost threaten to beat on the 3rd guy. And that's how we got the banking system to this day that we have. So, and obviously all of this is just a theory, a factual theory. No, I'm joking.
Controlled such large amounts of the American economy that their fortunes weren't measured in billions of dollars, but in the percentage of America's GDP. Such vast amounts of wealth in the hands of so few had never been seen before in the history of America, and the gap between rich and poor became increasingly transparent to the average American. The poorest were poorer than they are today, and the rich were even richer. And as Gilded Age industrialization gave rise to the urban factory worker,
Sorry for pausing it. Definitely not the last thing, but this is quite interesting. I'll give you this. This is very, very interesting. People were poorer than they are today. Okay, so let's think of like the poorest guy, in Jacksonville, Mississippi, right? He's in a trailer park. He's probably smoking weed, probably doing like a bunch of other bullcrap, right? Okay, so people were poorer than that guy that okay? That is insane to me, man. Like that is absolutely ridiculous because you can at least, I don't even know. Like look, there are kids here, children working in a factory, children. Look, little buddy's like has his soul ripped out from underneath him, bro. Anyway.
wages were incredibly low, working conditions were dangerous, and labor unions were actively shut down by force. In addition, rural farmers were being crushed by debt, falling crop prices, and rising freight fees. So a populist movement developed, with the goal being to shift the tax burden onto the wealthy in the form of an income tax so that they could pay their fair share.
Paid their fair share of taxes.
It's not a bad
Tariffs
idea.
and excise taxes became the main target of this populist movement, with the idea that they disproportionately affected the poor and the middle classes. Allow me to explain. In the late 1880s, tariffs made up for 55 to 60% of all federal revenues. They've become popular again in the last year or so, so a lot more people understand what they are, but just as a refresher, here's how they work. Say you go to the hardware store to buy a hammer and you have two options. One is an American-made hammer and it's $25, and the other is a foreign-made hammer and it's $20. Well, you might purchase the American one just because it's made in America.
Right.
The chances are more likely, if they're both the same quality, you're going to buy the one that's cheaper. A basic principle of free market economics. Well, if the federal government now steps in and places a 50% tariff on that foreign-made hammer, its price is going to go from $20 all the way up to $30. Well, this does a few things. First, it changes which hammer you're more likely to buy, and now the American one becomes more likely to be purchased because it's cheaper. But second, this adds a layer of protection to both the American manufacturer of the hammer and the jobs that it's providing to create that product. Overall, this puts money back into the American economy by providing a nice little revenue for the US Treasury, which funds the federal government and reduces the national debt. However, there are third and fourth order effects to tariffs as well. The American company, now insured of its market position, can raise its price from $25 up to, say, $28, knowing still full well that it's going to outcompete the foreign hammer. This obviously provides more profit to the company and, in turn, does put
Sorry for pausing again, but yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. Like, if it's kind of similar to what's going on now. It's like foreign goods are almost better in not better in quality, but if you can make it for cheaper, and sell it, why wouldn't you take the foreign quality one? So I understand what you're saying.
Even more money into the American economy. But this process makes it more expensive for you, the consumer. And if you're not in the business of making and selling hammers, which if you're going to the hardware store to buy one, why would you be? You actually end up paying more than you would otherwise. Well, sure, if a bunch of tariffs are put in place across a bunch of swaths of the economy, overall, you might end up benefiting from them because you might have a job or work for a company that benefits from them, but this is not guaranteed to happen. And this was primarily the situation that the American farmer found themselves in at the height of the Gilded Age. And as most people know, farming in those days wasn't done in the industrial scale that it's sort of done at today. Most farming was done by small family farmers. High tariffs made the average farmer's crop less profitable because it required more money to keep and maintain and develop marketable crop. In addition, the agricultural industry as a whole was becoming more mechanized. What used to be done with men and horses and animals was now more and more increasingly being done with machines. And these machines added to the underlying financial burden of maintaining a healthy farm. At the same time, vast tracts of land in the West that were either being sold...
As somebody who's worked on a farm, yeah, machines are very useful. Very, very useful.
Sold or given away as the country expanded in that direction were now being cultivated in mass. This produced unexpected bumper crops, which means that as a whole, the agricultural industry provided far more of one crop than they thought they were going to need that year. When this happens, because there are now vast amounts of supply, the cost for that same crop goes down. Demand is the same, but there's more supply, so prices fall. Stacked on top of all this were rising shipping rates on the railroads, which at the time were absolutely vital to getting a crop to market. And tariffs benefited railroads, allowing them to charge more for their freight than they would be able to do otherwise. But again, this did not benefit the average American farmer. It just made things more difficult. And while high tariffs affected several industries in this way during the Gilded Age, I used the farmers as the example because they seem to be the industry that was most affected by them. So in the late 1880s, tariffs made up almost 60% of federal revenues, and excise taxes made up for most of the remainder. Excise taxes place an additional flat cost on everyday goods of consumption that drive up the overall price to the consumer. Today you can think
Right,
of them in
right.
terms of cigarette taxes, gas taxes, alcohol
yeah,
taxes, anything like that. That's a perfect
makes sense.
example of an excise tax. And because excise taxes are a flat amount charged on an item that anyone who buys it pays the same equally, they have a disproportional effect on low and middle class people rather than they do on high class, because as a percentage of total wealth, the low and middle class pay more. Overall, this form of taxation also adds to the everyday financial burdens of regular folks. So knowing that tariffs and excise taxes were doing this,
Okay, I
they
get it,
became
I
the
get it
enemy of the populist movement. And of course, anywhere there is a populist movement, there will be politicians there to stoke the fires. They began jumping on the political bandwagon, all repeating the
so
same
wild.
message. Replace regressive tariffs and excise taxes with a progressive income tax aimed squarely at the wealthy. To them, a federal income tax was the perfect, morally justifiable advance of power. And the logic, to their credit, was fairly simple. If Gilded Age barons like John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie had amassed unprecedented sums of wealth on the back of the American economy, then why wouldn't we get them to pay more into...
Hold on. So, something I thought about was that it's not that they don't have a lot of money. They have what's the next level above FU money type thing.
idea, selling it as a class tax that would only affect the rich and get them to pay their fair share.
Pay their fair share.
Presidents Grover Cleveland and later William Jennings Bryan argued that the tariff was the mother of all trusts, and that only an income tax could break up the marriage between big business and Congress. The idea became politically irresistible, such that even Republicans began to jump on board. And then the populist movement got exactly what it needed: the financial panic of 1893. One of the most severe economic crises America has ever seen, second only to the Great Depression itself. This triggered a multi-year depression, mass unemployment, bank collapses, railroad failures, and political upheaval. And with progressive populism already brewing on an income tax, Congress finally saw the opportunity to take its shot. The 1894 Revenue Act was passed in August of the same year, establishing the first peacetime federal income tax. I say peacetime because there was a federal income tax during the Civil War from 1861 to 1872, but it was done during a time of war to pay for the war. Nobody ever questioned it. It naturally ended in 1872,
that makes sense.
so
That
there's
makes
not really
sense.
much
I mean,
to
it was
say
to
there.
fund the war.
The new federal income tax, however, was different. It was a permanent peacetime tax on incomes, not done to pay for some expensive war, but to be done as a permanent solution of perpetually funding the federal government. While it was intended to be paired with tariffs and excise taxes, nothing like this had ever been done before. The new law proposed a modest 2% tax on incomes above $4,000, equivalent to roughly $90,000 in today's money. However, because there were more people under this threshold than there are today, in fact, America today is far richer as a whole than it was back then, this tax was only going to affect about 2% of the total population. But the group of wealthy barons that it was aimed at was not just about to sit around and let this happen if anything could be done about it. And what would that be? They would challenge the new income tax as an unconstitutional, unapportioned direct tax on property.
If you're so profitable, why do you sell
Brother,
it?
man. Okay, so I'm actually gonna pause it here. I'm gonna make a bunch of videos, so.